We are Michael Wood, a Ph.D. in police management and former sergeant with the Baltimore Police Department, and Ty Tate, a regular person like most of you, trying to make sense of the world we all live in. A world where what you don't know can hurt you. This is Wood and T on the POV.
All right. So next up, why are ideas like the thin blue line promoted in the face of public outcry over police brutality? Why are police seemingly like trying to draw attention to themselves and their own personal issues during this time? And what do you think that means?
Well, I don't want to dismiss the perspective of those who see police strictly as the representation of state authority. So there's a lot of people that have the philosophy that no matter what the police do, it's pretty much wrong because it's using violence for state authority to get compliance from their citizens. And I think that's a whole nother topic. I wouldn't necessarily argue with those people who see police and they're like, oh, look at these people playing victims when they're just this state sanctioned violence of those in power. And that's a much bigger picture look at policing. And I don't try to get caught up in that. I try to get caught up in how to manage my employees so that they behave in a certain way that the community wants them to behave in. That's fundamentally what I care about. And so when we talked about how how racist cops don't matter, that's the same kind of thing. I just don't care about anybody's necessarily their history or what they're coming from. I want to know how I make policies that make people perform the way that the community expects them to perform when your power is freedom and life and liberty that you're actually going to be judging on people out there. So I just want to be clear that I kind of have a different perspective when it comes to that, or at least focused perspective. I think the individuals who feel victimized by that type of policing and who some are objectively victimized by policing being state-sanctioned violence. And so those people are victims. I'm not dismissing any of that whatsoever. Staying focused on how the individual police can feel victimized. I want to give just an example of a real officer that worked for me. He was a kid who grew up in the city, a black kid, strove to serve in the city that he grew up in. And now he's kind of being called a racist Uncle Tom and a bastard, and he should be sued personally and fired. His pension and salary should be taken away. And when he shows up to a 911 call that is really another 80-year-old black grandmother's plea for help, he gets in an altercation, it goes sideways, and then he should lose everything that he's worked for. Everything that his family, I mean, we don't think about that. Here he is, his black wife and his black children are going to have their father taken away from them as well, and either have his career ruined or thrown in a prison cell. That man, he's a victim. I don't know how to get around that. And now there is a fear not just of being that person, but that becoming that person is right around the corner for any officer. That it doesn't matter what objectively happens in a scenario. Now, I think when I started talking about police violence and police killings, we weren't looking at them like we're looking at them now. I don't think that there were lots of shootings when I was coming up in early policing where it was just like, bro, like what possible defense do we have of this? And just because the guy had a knife that he's dead and it's okay. It's like the knife was in his pocket. There was a time when a guy with a knife in his pocket, they're like, well, he had a weapon, he got what he deserved. And I don't really see that happening in the last 5 to 10 years. I have not seen like those kind of police killings. So I do think that a lot has changed. But can police be a bunch of snowflakes? Yeah. I mean, I think I've been saying that for a long time, that the majority of cops are snowflakes. I think people that are drawn to positions of power are often snowflakes trying to make up for their own internal sense of not having power previously in other events in life. So that's probably that 80-20. I think you have like 20% of police are like these bonehead jocks, male or female, whoever, ex-military and stuff, and they're just rah going out there, follow the law, do all the work. And then the other ones are actually quite scared, and they do feel like victims, and they don't really go out there and do much. But I'm not going to say that that's not more of what the community expects anyway. It's just not what I would do. I can't be judged for that. Everybody's rightful to judge whether you really want an aggressive alpha male doing policing. I think there's a place for us, but I don't think that the place is widespread as it is now. So you don't necessarily want soft cops in certain scenarios. I understand we may want soft cops in certain scenarios, but yeah, we don't really want soft cops. I don't think, unless we're talking about a different vision of policing. So if we're having cops go out and respond to gun violence, man, those can't be soft people. If we're having somebody that's going to go in and respond to your grandmother's home being invaded by the local drug dealers or some serial killers going around, these things happen, and you're not going to want soft cops for them. But do you want soft cops pulling you over that have a victim mentality and maybe are afraid? Yeah, maybe you actually do. You know, I'm not sure around that. And I would like to say that I've been around the block. I've been in a lot of scenarios. And man, most people are snowflakes. So I don't understand how most cops aren't also going to be snowflakes. I mean, I would say there are lots of recorded conversations, and I have handfuls of ones that I never even put out because I thought, man, I'm going to look like such a bully dickhead if I even put out this interview that I just had. Because I think when you start questioning someone's, whether it's their position of status, whether it's power or what they know of the world, I mean, I get into things with trying to get people to explain what it is to be black or who is and who is not black. And eventually I'm probably like just asking that. I'm probably going to get to pretty much anyone's buttons eventually. And that's just using words. So maybe we're all snowflakes. And when in such kind of stressful scenarios, we see a lot of it come out. I mean, it sounds bad, but it is funny that I can't tell you how many times suspects acting all hard get in the back of that police car and they start crying, right? Right away. We're like, that's just human nature, really, to kind of be a snowflake. And it's about whether that guard up is up or down in how much you see. So I think maybe it's good that the guard is down and you see cops kind of being snowflakes more than being warriors and saying shut up and not listening. I mean, at certain times, I was prone to do things like that myself. So I can understand how you maybe want something differently like that. I think when it comes to assaults too, there's an issue with cops. Cops are victimized a lot. I mean, technically, I've been assaulted a couple times in my life I'm 41 years old. In my personal life, I've had a few sucker punches and a few fights and stuff like that people have done to me. But I mean, that's me. I provoke people. The common person is not going to be assaulted by someone. Is not going to ever get punched because they're just trying to do their job. But when I was on the job, I mean, I was assaulted so many times being a cop that I just have written it off as part of the job. To me, I mean, people have heard me say that. Yeah, I mean, I've always felt. I mean, I felt like, yeah. I mean, I signed up, or I can understand why this happened. But you're talking about a Marine. You're talking about somebody who's coming in looking for action. And I don't think we want most cops to be people looking for action. So it's such a toss-up to me on whether we're going to do this. And I looked up for you just so I could know what the FBI was saying about assaults of victims, police. I mean, and they're mostly male, they're mostly white, but there's a lot of black cops that are getting killed. and granted, the numbers are low. There was only 48 officers feloniously killed in 2019. So the argument when you say, is policing dangerous when it comes to dying? It's actually not. But when it comes to whether you're going to be assaulted or be mistreated on the street, the numbers are, let's see. Or I only had the desk pulled up. But I mean, it's tens of thousands of assaults every year. And that's just getting punched. And I think sometimes they have to charge things or they have to write things in reports that cops are overblown. I think sometimes when you see like a riot happened in Seattle today, 30 cops were injured. Well, part of that is because we're city and union employees. And if we so much as rip a fingernail off, well, then you got to file a report and that's considered an injury. So I do think the big numbers are kind of overblown, but for the average person, I mean, their odds of getting assaulted on the job or being victimized at their job is much higher than the average person out there. So to an effect, cops are victims, and there is a bit of a Snowflake PD. But who am I to say what you want? I feel like that's a decision for you. I'll kick the doors down if you tell me to. I promise. I'll kick them. I'll kick all the doors down. I'll lock everybody up that you tell me to lock up. It's up to you whether that's what you want.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about that before. That you're asking people to do the job, but you have to be very specific about how you want that job done.
Yeah, what do you think people like me do?
To me, then I'll do it how I feel, and then you can't get mad at me later.
Right. We have that's hinting on another big problem in policing when it comes to feels. A lot of left wingers may not like when right wingers say things like "F your feelings," but I hope anyone can understand why that is true when it comes to police. Currently, the law is that how a police officer feels is whether they are justified in killing you. F your feelings. Seriously, for all of you, no matter whether you're left, right, up, down, in the middle, I don't care. F your feelings. We are talking about policy that affects lives, and I'm not interested in how the cop feels, and I'm not interested in how you feel. I'm interested in what gets everyone home alive and moving on to have a second chance.
And that's a great thing to bring up, because I think a lot of people don't understand that presently the rules of engagement are, if you feel scared, you can kill somebody. And that I think most people don't think that's a great idea, but I think a lot of folks aren't sure what to do differently. I've heard you say that one of the main things we can do differently is stop sending police for non-violent situations, stop sending people with guns into non-violent situations. So talk to the folks about that a little bit.
Yeah, I've always wondered certain events. So it's just looking at the numbers. And I'm not even going to say that it will definitely work. But if you just look at the rationale, you have, in Baltimore, for example, we have these things called STIOs, and we have meter maids, special traffic enforcement officers, and people who do minor offenses on the street. These are unarmed people making kind of like citations for civil offenses, minor stuff, violations. And yes, does a meter maid get pushed around sometimes or have her clipboard thrown across the street? Yeah, it happens. But people don't get out of their car and start shooting the meter maid because they know, violence isn't always rational, but there's not a real threat there's not a physical threat from this person that they're going to stop what you're doing. So sometimes people are on edge. They get triggered by certain things. And when we look at like car stops for when cops are killed during a car stop, most of the time is because the person thinks, and I don't even want to get into what they think, but the obvious logic of it is that the cop is going to stop them from continuing about their freedom. And because the officer is armed, the choice is death of the officer or and your freedom, or you lose your freedom and the officer lives. That's the paradigm if you're in a tough situation. And now I don't think there's so many sidetracks to this. I actually don't think there's enough people physically capable of keeping their cool in these scenarios where a cop is always on the edge and always has a life-threatening scenario thrown out. I think there are people that can handle it just fine, but I think those people are very rare. And what I would like to do is have somebody that's unarmed, more of the meter maid, special traffic enforcement officer, be the person that's pulling people over for speeding tickets or for things, minor offenses. And if the person's going to run away from them, then fine. Then that special traffic enforcement officer can get somebody that's more aggressive, can get the people that can stay cool to do some investigation, find out the car, figure out where they are. And we have a lot of investigative power. People don't realize how easy it is to find out certain things. Like there are programs where basically we can put in one house you've ever been in at as an address, and anyone that's ever been associated with that address or any addresses or where they've been or houses you are, every possible house you could be at is like at a click of a button. So we're going to find these people. We can track them down and then be smart about isolating them and using violence in a way that doesn't put other citizens at risk and doesn't put the officers at risk at more. One of the things in the Marine Corps that we talk about a lot is this thing called violence of action, which sounds bad, and this is the kind of justification, good intent of doing drug raids quickly with no knocks. These things should be used for violent offenders, not because evidence may go missing. We really shouldn't care that much that evidence may go missing. But when you're talking about a violent offender or deadly situation, when the police are well planned or the assaulting force is well planned, they can come in there super aggressive, bang down doors, and just create a scene that appears to be chaos, that as soon as the smoke clears, everybody's fine. The police had all the advantage. Everybody comes out alive. That's literally what we train to do day in and day out when you're in these types of units. And those are the type of people that should be doing these type of things, just because they're way less likely to make mistakes. We make sure we're actually isolating these incidences so people who aren't really physically apt. I mean, in Hollywood, you can shoot somebody pretty easily. In real life, it's extremely difficult. Moving targets are not an easy thing to hit with a handgun. Anybody that thinks they are watched entirely too much movie and hasn't gone out there and actually shot a gun for themselves. And it's dangerous for the public to just be popping off rounds. You do not want to be doing that stuff. So I would suggest that we go into less armed types of policing so that we can focus more intently on SWAT-style responses when it's needed and in its rarity. But I don't think you should be using that kind of state force to go out on regular occasions, because it's almost an escalation in itself just because the decision has changed. My mere presence, I get in so many sidetracks, I'm sorry. But one of the main things that really changed my perspective was becoming a drug cop and taking my uniform off. Because when I was hiding in these neighborhoods, I would hide in cars and I would hide in abandoned buildings and I would sit there and watch people all day long. But that was the first time I got to see people without my influence. What was my uniform and my presence changed the way everyone acted, the way the whole scenario laid out. And when I got to see people without my presence, I did see things a lot differently. It was a lot less tense. I mean, even sometimes being a detective and just coming up to people in regular clothes actually made the conversation, just that, be very different than when I was out there in a very authoritative role. So it's just things like that I want to think about more that we do in our criminal justice system. And we have to test those things out. But it seems we're very afraid to actually test those things out. It's like we almost think, or a good example is you can watch a rioter and you can watch a bunch of people going around saying all cops are bastards, abolish policing, and then something happens to them and literally the first words out of their mouth are call the police. It's like, come on. You know, we all admit to a certain extent we need some kind of authoritative community force, but what are we getting that authority to actually do? And as long as we can say, well, the governor's in charge or the mayor's in charge, then I feel like we can just vicariously blame those people instead of actually realizing that it is very easy to take control of these agencies and to make changes so that if you don't want cops walking your streets with guns pulling people over left and right, you literally can make those changes very easily. It's just, I think we're all stuck in a cycle of fear when it comes to what we do with our policing. We're afraid of losing them, and we're afraid of what will happen if we change them almost.
It seems to be the thing that's going around right now, that everybody feels like something needs to change, but it seems like folks are trapped between the extreme of cops go out, do whatever you have to do, kill whoever you have to kill, or we practically don't have any policing at all.
Right.
No in between. There's no way to, kind of make things work in a logical, you have the people there to handle violence when you need it. And if you don't need violence, you solve it another way. But it's like folks seem really, really at either end of that, and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, my PhD work in my last research study, the big one that I did, also evoked another thing that I wasn't thinking about. It just arose from the data that there's also a big problem among all cops, among the law, and pretty much all community members on what the source of ethics is. So sometimes you see the source of ethical conduct being, so by that I mean, what is moral? What is an ethical thing to do in this particular situation? Half of the law, I'll just say, and half of the people pretty much would end up saying that the person needs to do what they feel individually. So their individual ethics. What would you do in that situation? What would I do in that situation? And then the other half of the people would argue that you come from communal ethics. So, I mean, like, let's say abortion or something like that. If you're a Catholic position, it would just be no. The communal decision is no. No individual situations, no individual things can happen that would change what this is. This is a community-driven ethic. This is what you will do, and any other deviation would be immoral. And then you have the idea that somebody needs to make their own decisions. We need to trust that these people are in a situation and in a perspective that no one else can understand. So we need to just trust whatever they did as an individual in that moment. And I think that comes a lot from that's what you would expect, right? You're like, well, I evaluated the situation. I thought about everything I could at the time, and this is what I thought was the most ethical thing to do. That seems like a reasonable defense to what your conduct would be. But I argue, and I can't, maybe it is something that goes against humanity, and I think policing does stand out from the rest of humanity because of what we're asking them to do, that you must, as a cop, go by communal ethics, not an organizational ethics. What the community determines your outcome to be. So this is what I mean about when we were earlier talking about intent versus outcome. I want you to follow strict community processes, and if the community decides the first thing you do as a cop is you use a baton, then you do a taser, and then you can go to your gun. And not every community is going to agree with that order. That's just the bullcrap order that I'm coming up with. But if that's what the community wants, then that's what you do. But when it goes wrong, that's when the community is responsible. And as an individual thing, what happens is we get to then judge the individual by what they determined was moral or immoral, and we get to blame that person instead of actually focusing on the community and the culture that we've created. That cop, I know there are breaks in the power structure right now, but that cop does work for the city. They do work for the people, and the people as a large group right now are not actually taking responsibility on their end for what those police are doing. They're funding it. They're going through with it. Even if you're sitting there objecting to what they're doing, you're not actually doing any new policy or getting things done that change it other than complaining. So I think the big difference between the communal issue is where we need to go. But communal issue also means you're not going to be able to punish individual cops unless they commit a blatantly criminal act. Whenever they follow procedure, then that's something the community is going to have to deal with. And that's kind of a bit of what we're talking about now. When you talk about something like George Floyd's killing, One of the problems is that cop was trained to put his knee on the back of that neck. So activists that were really concerned about policing should have been on this a long time ago, making sure those kind of things weren't training procedures. You can't blame the end result, that individual, when really the community has for 30 years, 40 years been setting this situation up to occur. It's relatively inevitable. Yeah, and so one of our biggest problems is we have found places where you only need like 7,000 signatures on a ballot to put it on the ballot. And that's what Portland just did. They just went and got signatures, they put it on the ballot, and people voted it in, because pretty much you can get anything voted in if you word it the right way and you go around and you're really activist about it. I think it's a terrible policy that Portland's put in, but it's an example of how actually easy it is to fundamentally restructure your local policing. Now, you can't change the FBI. You're not going to change the state police. But the vast majority of people do not interact with the federal law enforcement or state police. We're really talking about local cops. Local cops have more power than anybody else. They can enforce all laws. So really, you just need to change your local cops. And the local cops just need minor instances. A lot of places have sheriffs. Literally elect the sheriff to change the policy that you want. And if you don't have a winning argument, which is my condition right now, I do not have a winning argument, well, then you have to keep working on your argument. And you have to build up enough support to get those things done. But it is really easy in a lot of places. We complain a lot about, we would go and we would talk to a bunch of people who wanted to make changes in the community. But then you'd be like, okay, here's it is. You only need 14,000 signatures and you can get it on the ballot and we can make these changes real. And then the next day they would be at a protest with 30,000 people and nobody would have a clipboard collecting signatures actually trying to get something done. So, I mean, I've pretty much given up on that aspect, thinking it's something that maybe I need to focus on insiders like rebels more, because you have what is called a benevolent dictator. It's a weird concept, but literally throughout the history of human government, the only time power goes back to the people is when you have a benevolent dictator. And that's somebody that comes in, has all the power, and then just benevolently gives it back to the people. This happens. I mean, Caesar did it, and it's like, I guess it happens. I mean, I don't know what to say. These things do happen throughout history, and that's the only time we have that the power actually goes back. So I think there is a possibility of like a governor or something like that for some reason just sneaks in through the system and is like, bam, changes it, and maybe you can get that person into office. But it seems much more pragmatic and effective to just get enough people together to make those changes in your local area for what you want to get done. The problem is what a lot of people want to get done is what they feel will help them versus what the data says will actually help them. So you're always going to hear me talking about lead poisoning. If you want to fix your city's problems when it comes to violence, you get the goddamn lead out of your city, and in 20 years your violence rates will plummet. Now the problem is it takes 20 years. Nobody that has a 4-year term is interested in a policy that takes 20 years to be effective. But a community taking over is interested in a policy that has 20-year payoff. So it's things like that. We need 20-year payoff lead abatement. We need to really restructure and think about what we're doing about fatherless homes. I mean, I'm as liberal as they can, and I want to say that maybe it's just 2 people in the house. It doesn't matter whether they're male and female. It doesn't need to be a nuclear family, and maybe all that's true. But the data is clear that you need a masculine and a feminine figure involved in a child's life if you want that child to go out and have odds of success. So, I mean, those are things we kind of got to focus on.
Even if somebody disagrees with that, I think the bottom line is that if you're going to have children in any home environment, you need as many adults present as possible. Whether somebody feels like, they agree with same sex or any of that, that really is beside the point. You need structure, you need discipline, you need financial support, you need a lot of things. I mean, you need as many tools for success as possible. How else do you expect the kid to grow up and, make something of themselves if they don't have any sort of guidance or examples. If those examples are put in jail, well, where do you think the kid's most likely to end up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to object to it. I want to have a soft heart and think that everybody, a single parent out there, can achieve it. And like, are there some that can achieve it? Yeah, but man, it takes a community. It takes a village. You know, it really does. You know,
Sure, individuals can do things, but man, life is easier when you've got a support system.
exactly. And I think that those things, and I think police can help towards that. I think they can be a big role in that. And I think a lot of it is police, like our healthcare system, when people make good objections about our healthcare system, I think a lot of these things are true, but we've had this system going for so long, this car's been going down the street for so long, that it's a lot easier to just change the path of the car than it is to start all over again. And when you have a big institution like policing set up, you can change it and really use that power to do all these things. I think it's relatively simple. It's just very scary. And I think that's true of cops too. Cops view their job as something that's almost impossible, but it's not. It's very possible. It's just scary. And it takes people doing scary things to kind of elevate their communities, whether it's military people standing on the wall fighting back something, or it's healthcare workers, whatever it is. The people on the front got to do scary, courageous shit for the rest of us. That's just how, I mean, that's even wealth generation. I hit on that before. You got to sacrifice for the future. And people, when they basically refuse to sacrifice for the future, then their families aren't going to have it. I forget the saying. It's something like this: we all live in the shade of trees that weren't planted by us. And I think that's true. We need to, the true heroes of the world are the quiet people planting the trees that everyone else gets to bask in later. But if there's no trees, you can't just bitch that there's no trees. You got to do the work and put them there.
Yeah, it has to start somewhere.